Knowing how many people live in Australia and in its regions is crucial, and recently the ABS improved the way it derives these fundamental statistics. In part 1 of this two-part series, we explained how the 5-yearly census helps us calculate the population of Australia and its regions every census year. In 2013, the ABS released a new 20-year series of population estimates with a one-off revision to this core data series. With the start and end points of this 20-year revision period set, new and improved information tells us now that the 1996, 2001 and 2006 census-based estimates should have been lower. So what this means is that growth rates throughout this time are different to what we earlier thought. And for the most recent intercensal period, 2006 to 2011, the national growth rate was higher than previously estimated. Over these 5 years, Australia grew by 263,000 more people than we previously estimated. When we break this extra growth down into the regions, the new series shows a wide variation in new growth rates across the country. Despite having 2/3 of the country's population, the capital cities got well less than half of this extra growth. Melbourne grew by almost 40,000 more than the old estimates indicate. Sydney grew by around 30,000 more, while the other capitals grew by a combined 35,000 more than we previously estimated. The rest of the country grew by 160,000 more than previously estimated. Queensland got around half of this extra growth. The rest of New South Wales and Victoria combined received around the same as the rest of Queensland, while the remaining non-capital city areas received a lot less of this extra growth, and in fact, for a small number of regions, we now estimate that populations grew by smaller amounts than before. So why have we revised historical populations? Well, it comes down to how we estimate the number of people missed in the census, now and in the past. As explained in part 1, the census undercount adjustment is a key part of turning the census population count into the official population estimate. Due to a change in the method we used to derive this undercount, for the 2011 census, we improved the estimate of census undercount, and we found that the number of people missed from the census was not as high as initially thought. This means that the undercount adjustment for estimating the population from the 2011 census was much lower than for earlier censuses. Our analysis also revealed that too many people were added to the counts for previous censuses back to 1996. This means that the former population estimates calculated for earlier years are, for most parts of the country, higher than what they should have been. We have therefore revised or recasted all of our historical estimates back to 1991 to deliver more reliable population levels and to ensure population growth better reflects what we know from other information. The adjustments made to our previous estimates was a 4-stage process. We first adjusted at the national level, which were distributed to the states and territories by calculating new census undercount rates. With new state and territory populations, we then derived adjustment factors for each part of state, using population components data to guide us. In the final adjustment stage, we applied the part of state adjustment to all regions below each part of state. With our start and end points set, the biggest national adjustment was for 2006, progressively getting smaller back to 1991. The census points were our pillars for the recasting exercise, from which we spanned out for the intercensal years to build the new bridge of population change from 1991 to 2011. Like at the national level, the state and territory adjustments were generally larger as we moved forward from 1996. Next, you can see the adjustments made for each capital city and rest of state region for 1996, 2001 and 2006. Note in 2006 how rest of Queensland gets far more of the national adjustment than any other part of state. Also note the last bars, showing the combined capital cities getting much less of the national adjustment than the rest of the country in 2006. As a result of this recasting exercise, we now have a more realistic indication of how the populations of capital cities have changed since 1991. We can get a sense of this simply by looking at how the share of the country's population living in the capitals has changed between 1991 and 2011, before and after recasting. The previous line looking quite jittery, especially around the census years. The new line shows a much smoother change in the share of the country living in capital cities over this time. This improvement is more apparent when we look at the individual capital cities. In New South Wales, for example, while there can be no doubt that Sydney has grown more than the rest of the state over the past 10 or so years, there was a very suspicious kink in the curve for 2006. The recast series presents a smoother transition of this share over time, not just because we made it smooth, but because that's what the components data, the combined effect of births, deaths and migration, is telling us. Queensland probably shows the most improved new series of all the states, due to the relatively large part of state adjustment in 2006. While the shape of the 20-year line of share of population living in the capitals is also smoother for the remaining states. After making these adjustments, all regions of Australia have new historical estimates and therefore new growth figures. Because the historical adjustments for most areas are downwards, it means population changes since then are now higher for these areas. And despite small changes to historical population levels for some regions, there are some large changes in growth rates for these regions, and a large variety of these new growth rates. Let's go through a few examples to show why small adjustments to levels can lead to large changes in growth. For Toowoomba in Queensland, the original 2006 estimate was just over 151,000 people, while the 2011 preliminary rebased estimate was 155,000 people. The new series reveals that Toowoomba's 2006 population has been adjusted down by 3.51%. This reflects the 2006 rest of Queensland adjustment we saw earlier. And as explained in part 1 of this video series, we have a slightly different 2011 estimate due to final rebasing. Based on the previous release of data then, the population of Toowoomba increased by around 3,600 people. However, after recasting and final rebasing, this almost triples to 9,500. This is quite a substantial change in 5-year growth for Toowoomba, and makes much more sense based on other information we know about Toowoomba for this period. Let's quickly step through another example, this time where the 2006 part of state adjustment isn't as high as rest of Queensland. For Burnside in Adelaide, the 2006 population was adjusted down by just 0.86%, like all other parts of Greater Adelaide. And yet despite this small adjustment to the base, the 5-year growth estimate is now well above what it was before. For another case study, let's look at Wangaratta in Victoria, which was formerly an area officially declining in population. The 2006 adjustment has pulled the 2006 base down and now below the 2011 estimate, meaning Wangaratta's new growth figure over the 5 years is now positive. For another example, let's go to Wentworth in New South Wales, which is an area whose original 5-year change was negative. While the recast series still shows a declining population, it is now not down by as much, again due to a lower base. And so now all regions of the country have new and more plausible official estimates of population change. These thematic maps of old versus new population growth give some feel for the changes that have taken place across the country between 2006 and 2011. The largest states had similar adjustments downwards to the 2006 populations, with the non-capital city areas getting a large chunk of this extra growth. The impact is seen more in the low growth regions of these states, including areas further inland. As already mentioned, rest of Queensland received a large slice of the extra growth pie, bringing population growth back to levels more in line with expectations for large parts of the state. South Australia also received a significant share of the extra growth, with many areas of the state's south and east now having higher growth than earlier estimated. Several parts of Western Australia's southern regions also now have higher and more realistic growth rates, while northern WA has had its previous extremely rapid growth adjusted down to more plausible levels after recasting. Tasmania's revisions are interesting. While the recasting reduced Hobart's population in 2006, the rest of Tasmania was actually adjusted upwards, meaning lower growth. The reduction across Northern Territory's 2006 population means that growth rates in the top end are also slightly larger now. While the ACT shows a different story to the rest of the country, with its 2006 population actually adjusted upwards. This gives Canberra region slightly less growth than in the past, although the high growth areas of Gungahlin in the north are still high growth areas. The new and improved series of population estimates provides a better indication of how many people live in the regions and how each region has changed over time. This enhanced set of estimates gives us a better understanding of how the regions have changed and consequently how they may change in future. Particular benefits of this improved set of population estimates are extensive and significant and include a fairer allocation of funding and resources across the country, a more realistic idea of the changing demand for infrastructure and services, and better population data for assessing policies and programs for public and private sector investment in regions and electoral representation. The improved historical data also lets us better model population change over time, and crucially, it provides a more solid foundation for projecting the population out into the future, enabling better decisions for future planning. To access this new population data yourself, just go to the ABS website and download the new release of our main sub-state population product, Regional Population Growth. To assess the changes in population, simply refer also to the previous version of this product, where we have ensured the data is in exactly the same format to the new release. This consistent format lets you explore changes for your region of interest conveniently. As well as this large batch of new and improved data, we have provided plenty of supporting information with the release of the new estimates. For further information about these important changes, you can also get in touch directly with the ABS's Regional Population Unit. Thank you for watching.